All right, I think she's back.
Put a spell on you. Hello.
Awesome. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
All right, great. So, Suriya, I want to thank you for joining us today. Again, this is the next segment of the Black Beetle Health 21 Questions series, where we're taking the opportunity to talk to various individuals about their personal experience across different areas. For this particular segment, we're talking about chronic disease, chronic illness, and accessibility. So joining me today, we have Suriya Aisha, who is a queer artist, activist, and founder of Unmuted. But I'm going to give you the opportunity to give us a more extensive background on who you are and what you do in your work.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here and talk about this. So yeah, I'm Suriya. I'm a queer artist. So Muted is a network for queer, trans, intersex people of color based in Birmingham, UK, and the wider West Midlands. So through that, we kind of just create connections between people so that they don't feel that maybe they have to go to another city like London or Manchester, that it really feels that actually there's space in a city like Birmingham for them. In my art, I kind of do a lot of stuff that is about bringing people together. It's kind of using the artistic format to talk about different issues and represent different types of people's stories. So my current project that I'm working on is something that's a long-standing thing called Horizontal,
Yeah.
and it's investigating invisible disabilities experienced mainly by women and non-binary people.
hmm I'm glad you mentioned that. I actually, I did do a little research on you and I came across a talk that you did when you launched the Horizontals campaign, and I thought it was really good. There were four individuals presenting together in a poetic kind of presentation, and I thought it was really good the way that you all represented your personal story in that way and bringing awareness as a whole. So, um, uh, because this segment, of course, is on chronic illness and accessibility, if you don't mind sharing what particular chronic condition that you have experienced and kind of give us a brief timeline of that, whatever you feel
Yeah,
comfortable sharing.
thank you. Yeah, that's cool. So I have a long-standing brain condition. It's called Chiari malformation. I'll say it just in case there's anyone else out there who is experiencing it. It's quite rare.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I can type that into the chat later. So for something that people can research themselves. So I've had a brain operation when I was 19. And I guess the main parts of that is that I live with chronic fatigue, significant migraines. I'm registered as partially sighted, and I experience dizziness and things like that. I think it's interesting often when people actually ask me about what is the chronic condition you're living with, because I'm really interested in the ways that we, as people who live with disabilities or illnesses, often experience our condition in a very medicalized way. So part of my personal activism is to be very cautious and careful about the way that I describe who I am and what I live and experience with.
Right.
Because I think I had a mentor once who was also an artist who has a disability, and they spoke about how the words that we use to describe ourselves, I mean, a lot of people know this in terms of affirmation, really impact on the way that you see who you are. So I
Right.
think it was interesting when I was talking to Harvey about this when we were setting it up, and he was like, he put disease in the title, and he was like, oh, and I said, oh, can you take that out? And he said, oh, I don't. Why do you? And I said, for me personally, that's not a word that makes me feel empowered. That's not a word that makes me feel that I can sit in it. And I don't. That's not against Harvey. That's not against anyone. It's just interesting how, especially as people of color and Black people, the words
Hmm.
that we choose to describe ourselves, because often we've only ever experienced our experience of living with the condition through the doctors, through medicalized system. So to me, it's always interesting where I'll say that I have Chiari malformation, but but the only person that really is for anyone else who is living with it. Does that make
That's a really
sense? So
good
that they
point.
can know so say that again, sorry.
Oh, I said that's a really good point because that
Mm,
doesn't necessarily mean anything to somebody unless they know what that condition is and what it
exactly.
entails. But when you say how it affects your life, then it's like,
Mm,
oh, now I understand. Yeah,
yeah.
and actually, as I was preparing for this, I realized that I actually know one. I have a friend who actually has that condition as well. So I kind of, was able to make that connection and find out, how has your life been affected by that? Because one thing that, and I would love to get your feedback on is, um, as time goes on, people might tend to forget, from 19 years old to however old you are now, we tend to forget, but that person doesn't forget. So
Yeah.
it actually urged me to reconnect with her and say, how are you? What's going on?
That's
How
really
are things for
interesting.
you
Yeah.
now? So,
That's really
yeah.
interesting. Yeah, no, definitely. That is something that I've definitely experienced because I think we often as well live in, I mean, we exist in binaries all the time, don't we? In terms of gender, in terms of sexuality, we think that it's either this or that. And I think that often happens with illness as well. So we think on a binary of sickness or wellness. And actually,
Mhm.
for me, as someone who lives with a chronic condition, I live in between that. There's never a time when I'm completely always sick, sick, sick. And there's not a time that I'm always really well, like I'm always somewhere in between. So I think what happens there, what's interesting there is that from my experience has been when I was 19 and I had an operation and I was in the church at the time actually. And so there was a lot of big ruckus and there was a lot of prayer meetings and there was a lot of, messages and stuff. And it was my experience of it then was interesting because obviously in a Christian background, it is all about being healed. So it's like the overcoming of you're ill and now God might have provided this operation for you and then you come out the other side and you're better.
Right.
Now I was always told that from my doctors and neurosurgeons was that this is a lifelong thing. Your operation will help you live with it, but it's never
Hmm.
gonna you're never gonna not be sick. But I think for
Hmm.
other people, they're so desperate for you to be well that they kind of invisibilized your constant experiences. So for example, my parents was so full of anxiety about me being really unwell and living in a life of pain that they often think, okay, well, but you had the operation, so you're fine now. Do you know what I mean? Whereas actually,
Yeah.
I still live with quite a lot of significant challenges.
Mhm.
And that's hard to explain a lot of the time that especially when you have an invisible condition, because it's hard for people to know that is still something you're dealing with. And yeah, with friends, even if, and I think it's a humanness. It's a human desire for people to be well and okay. That we
Mhm.
kind of also that means that we invisibilize a lot sometimes the things that they're dealing with.
Right. Because we also have to manage our own level of discomfort and saying, um,
Yeah.
I don't know what to say. I don't know. You don't want to treat them like they say with kid gloves. You don't want to be
Mm.
um, too overly sensitive, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you are giving them the support that they need at the same time. And then, like you mentioned, in the religious community, it's not like you're saying that you're not, having a positive outlook, you're not optimistic, you didn't feel like you're healed. Yes, you got, a layer of that, but you still have to live with it on a long-term basis. And that can apply to a variety of conditions.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. Definitely.
so since you initially were or diagnosed or treated, how has it kind of transitioned over the years as you moved into your work life and how you kind of balance all of that?
Mm. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think so. Obviously, I experienced symptoms from the as young as 8 years old. So I had quite significant migraines as a child. Um, but there's a twofold layer in terms of why my diagnosis was so long. I think I wasn't diagnosed until I was 17. So that's kind of 9 years of kind of a lot of dismissing, because there's a lot of childhood conditions that people are like, for example, childhood cancer is very underrepresented because people just can't really fathom the idea that a child could be significantly unwell is, again, a thing that we don't really want to believe. So for a lot of my years, it was dismissed as like, it's growing pains, I'm stressed, I'm not sleeping properly. And so at one point the doctor told me to like stop eating beans, like stop eating chocolate. Like, so for the whole of my teenage years and my young adulthood, I always remember that I never had Easter eggs, because my family always knew that I couldn't have chocolate. So they always used to buy me like these weird gifts, like as a replacement. And I'd just be like, I just want chocolate. But so that was what they thought was the reason, like, oh, you're ill because of this, because also we always want to kind of have a reason for it. So when I was diagnosed when I was 17, it was strange because I was young. And again, that was also because I actually campaigned quite a lot with my doctors. I stayed up like late, reading, researching, printing things off, like taking them to the doctors saying, do you think it could be this? What do you think it is? I think I really need a brain scan.
Wow.
And obviously at 16, 17, they're thinking, oh, okay, you don't really know what you're talking about. But it's strange, like on a spiritual level as well, I kept having these dreams about me having a brain operation. I know it sounds a bit out there, but I was really like, I just feel like this is something that I need to pursue. So I really, I pursued it in that way, and kind of really had to advocate and fight for myself for quite a few years, and my parents as well, until finally I had a first brain scan and it was misdiagnosed. It wasn't noticed. So that was another thing of the failure of some of the health systems, where if they often lost my documents. They lost that document, and I knew that it was something still wasn't right. So I campaigned to have another one. But obviously, there's also in the UK, because it's obviously funded by the government. They make the choice about where they spend your money, and brain scans, MRIs are very expensive to do. So, and also they have implications of radiation and stuff, but they are expensive processes to take place. So there was that thing of doctors would say to me, it's actually quite expensive to do this, so we're not going to do it again. But it was actually another doctor who finally pushed it through, and I got that and fine. So it was a struggle. It was a shock because I was in the middle of my A-levels. I suddenly became, I was now on the special educational needs register, even though I'd had years, again, of struggling in school with concentration, with falling asleep. But because I was a young Black girl, it was just that, oh, I'm rude and insolent and I'm not paying attention. But actually, I had quite a significant health condition. So I finally got the support that I needed when I was 17, which was great. And twofold, because obviously I felt sad about the support that I'd missed out on for previous years. And then when I went to university, I had a lot of support. I had 2 mentors. I had extra time. I had lots and lots of adaptions and disability access and stuff like that. That really helped. And the transition to work life was difficult, because you suddenly, and even at the university, they would say, you have all this now, but in the real world, there's not all of this. So I was worried about that, and I did, and I think it's still an ongoing process, really, championing for accessibility and adaptions, especially when you present as though there's nothing, it's an invisible condition. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of really hard because we have an idea of what disability looks like, don't we? Which is based on like a Victorian, very ableist, problematic view, and people with conditions look all kind of different ways. So yeah, and it's been a journey. I think it's been harder as well because what I have is rare. So I can't just say the word and people go, oh yeah, I know what that is and I know how to support you because I've got X, Y, Z, this person's got it. It's like you might have heard it once. Even some doctors Google it when I'm in the room with them, which is really like, fills me with so much ease. Do you know what I mean? So they'll say, and then I'll come in with a thing related to my condition and they'll be like, oh, 1 second, let me just, and I'm like, oh great. Like, so often I don't go to the doctors or the hospital because I'm just like, yeah, and it also takes 6 months between if I want an appointment with my specialist neurosurgeon, it's 6 months for me to get an appointment with them. So
Wow.
so yeah, it means that I explore a lot of alternative kind of management things
True.
and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you touched on so many key things that I want to mention, and Adelaide just mentioned how much of a shame it is that we have to work so hard to be recognized and acknowledged. And I do want to ask you, kind of expand it again, to just people dealing or living with chronic conditions in general. As far as in the UK, as you already mentioned, sometimes getting that access can be a challenge, especially in our underrepresented communities. How have you experienced that, or how do you see that on the wider scale? And do you see that improving as time goes along? Or do you still
I
kind of
think
see a gap there?
I think now that there's unfortunately been so many cuts made in the NHS, I see it being even more challenging because I
Mhm.
think certain conditions, often again, that binary of wellness and sickness is also, it sits on the same thing of dead and alive, which is a lot of what the health system, my experience has been, is kind of like, if you're not near death, then you're okay. So why do we need to, like, you can live with a bit of pain, just take some ibuprofen, take some paracetamol, take this thing. Oh, this pain medication is not working, we'll just up it to a stronger one. So
Mm,
there's not a sense of, if you're living with a long-term condition, I've often had experiences of, if they said, well, it's not life-threatening, so therefore it's not as urgent, which
mhm,
is difficult because it's kind of like, it's not life threatening, but it's definitely life debilitating, or it's challenging, or it's having a significant impact on my mental health, my relationships, my family dynamics. So that is the difficulty that I found navigating it, because you're against this ideology of, if you're not dying, then you're okay, which is just a bit, it's just the way kind of that westernized medicine works in a way. And I'm not slamming westernized. I see some positives in westernized medicine. Obviously I've benefited from it greatly, so it's not an either or. It's just, I noticed that can be quite challenging. It can be challenging if you are a, I'm an Aries. I don't know if people believe in like star signs. So I'm quite forthright. I'm quite determined. Do you know what I mean? So I feel I'm comfortable sitting in a space of challenge and conflict. So, but I know that if you're a different personality type, that might
mhm,
not be something you want to do. Like, you don't want to always go in like you're in a court of law when you're just going to the doctors and saying, I'm in pain and I need support.
mhm,
So that is something that I really feel passionate about, where I've supported my friends, other people in certain situations, to advocate for themselves, to talk about, how do you advocate, how do you keep record, how do you make sure you have access to your paperwork that you need to know what's going on for you, so that you
right,
can go back and get that doctor's name. It's a lot of work. It's a whole, me and my friends who are ill often say that being sick is a full-time job.
mm,
It's like you're unwell, and then you're also advocating on a way of, you're like your own lawyer. Do you know what I mean? A lot of the time in these spaces. So I would send a message to anyone out there who's going through that, to really try and connect with people who might be experiencing similar things to you. I was introduced actually by my neurosurgeon to join a Facebook group when I was
okay,
diagnosed. Um, and that really helped. My parents were also in it because I was young, obviously, and they were in it. They got support from other parents. They went in there. People would talk about it when they were going through the operations. People would talk about how they'd gone and advocated for themselves, and this hadn't worked, and we'd give each other advice. And I would say that that kind of community of people who are living with similar experiences to you really,
mhm,
really helps, because it gives you that, if you're not necessarily a person who might want to fight, want to advocate, having that insight from other people can really help you go, no, I'm going to go back. I'm not going to give up on this. I'm not going to stop asking for what I need, because I'm important, and actually I deserve to live my life to the fullest, that I can live it in the same way that well or able-bodied people are afforded the access to. So
Right.
yeah, so that's what I would say.
So what do you what are your thoughts regarding the perception of pain? And I think you kind of touched on it already. I've heard a lot of discussion about different perception of pain, and even as you said, if a person is going to access care, when they put you on that queue to be seen, that timeline, you know, they're making that determination about a subjective feeling that a person might have. So, what are your thoughts about that?
I had a social worker when I was younger, when I was diagnosed with being unwell, and they assigned you a social worker for access stuff. And she was really great, actually, because she said to me, whenever you have an assessment, always describe yourself on your worst day. So even in that moment, if you've gone to the hospital, say, for example, you've gone to the hospital with a really piercing headache, you sat in the waiting room for 2 hours and it subsided by the time the nurse comes to see you. Still describe what you had when you came in, because I think that is kind of, sometimes that will just enable you to get even the investigation that you might need to say, oh, it's nothing. But I know that I've been in situations where before I might have gone, well, actually, I kind of feel okay now. Or because of those cuts, unfortunately, in the NHS, they're kind of waiting for you to say that, waiting for you to say, oh, my chest kind of feels okay now. So they go, okay, fine, we won't do the EEG.
After
We won't
six
do the,
months,
yeah,
yeah.
we won't do the, exactly. So I might have been in pain for at 6 months in January. And by the time it comes around to July, June, whatever, I kind of feel different, but I still had that challenge that I need to talk about, and I need to have that kind of, not validation, but it's part of that care that doctors and medical professions can provide is also that kind of emotional reassurance that they can offer to you. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that is needed in terms of to say, for example, for my condition, there's not, unfortunately, because there's a lot of politics in terms of around research in medicine. So my
Mm-hmm.
condition and a lot of brain and spine conditions actually are under researched. So so they don't really know whether my condition is degenerative. They don't know whether the operation could have long-term effects. They don't
Mm-hmm.
really know what procedures work or don't work.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the time for me, sometimes going there is like to have that procedure, have that scan that can just say, no, it isn't degenerating, or it's changed a bit, but it's not significant enough that we need to worry.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes it can be like, oh, well, if you're not seeing double now, but you were last week, I think we can be fine about it. So it's kind of like,
Yes.
okay, so we need to, so I think that perception of pain is really a hard one. And I think it's difficult that you can't just describe how you're feeling. You have to kind of do it in a strategic way, which can also be
Yeah.
quite exhausting. It's not
Yeah.
just like, okay, how am I feeling now? It's like, no, actually. And also because the way that culturally a lot of Black people have been raised to deal with pain is
Uh-huh.
very different.
Yeah.
So you might have heard something, unfortunately, from a parent, from a guardian, from someone saying, don't make too much drama, stop drawing attention. Oh, come on, calm down, kind of thing. So that
Right.
you internalize that. So it's also psychological of like, you might be screaming and hollering in pain in your bedroom. Do you feel 100% comfortable to do that in the doctor's surgery? Maybe not. So you might hold it in a way that you don't. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily mean the pain's changed. It might just be your psychological way of expressing it has changed. And
Yeah.
often a lot of Black people, specifically Black women, are used to, unfortunately, holding on to pain in that way, which means that the perception of their pain is different as well. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like we're always seen as being stronger or being able to have a higher pain threshold. So I also make a very active decision if I'm ever accompanying anyone to the hospital, if I'm going myself, to just say, you have to describe it on the worst day. You have to say what it was like when you weren't able to cope. And
Mm-hmm.
if you have the blood test and the blood test comes back fine, what's the worst that can happen? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So that's what I would always advocate for.
That's a really good tip. I haven't heard that described before. I saw somebody else in the comments mention the fact that getting that that support and that access kind of relies on how severe somebody sees your symptoms. I've had cases
Mm,
where, like, of course, we're talking more so about invisible disabilities, but people with, patients that I've experienced with visible disabilities, and they still aren't able to get that coverage that they need. So it's like, how extreme does it have to be? You know what I mean? So, and of course, maybe there's that concern that are people trying to take advantage of the system, like that kind of thing.
mm,
But being able to advocate for yourself is so important. So I do want to kind of talk about ableism and how you've had to perhaps advocate for yourself in the workforce
mm.
and getting that recognition that you need, whether it's accommodations for. Well, I'll let you talk about it.
Yeah. Where should I start? I think I'm self-employed, and that was also an
Oh,
active
oh,
that
okay.
was also an active decision, actually, because I worry and I think people are getting better now, but beforehand I think I didn't trust that an employer would really be able to meet the access needs that I needed. And
Mm-hmm.
my main access needs are flexibility, and the often the way that my condition works is it can flare up. Like if the pressure changes in the air outside, like it will flare up conditions for me, and there's no way for me to measure that or anticipate that. There's no way for me to know whether that's going to happen in that day. Do you know what I mean? So I think having the flexibility and the choice and the agency is really important to me to pace how I work,
Yeah.
and the pace of how I work is different. I think so. I guess for myself as a self-employed person, it is taken a long time to really get to a place where I feel confident, comfortable to assert the needs that I require in certain projects or in certain workplaces, because I'm naturally kind of a high achiever. So I like that kind of buzz. I like going, I like I like feeling that kind of it's finished. I like staying up and thinking about it to that nth degree and kind of pushing myself. It's a clash with my personality is a clash with the condition that I live with. I can't I can't that's not the person that I can be. So it's changed the way that I have to see myself and the way that I have to work. So in terms of I have to say, okay, I want to stay up and do more of this and I'm striving for 100%, but actually I have to accept that some projects are going to be 70% of me, and actually my 70% is still quite good. So like it's I still don't have to worry about um failing, which is often what we think is like, if I don't do it over the top, I'm gonna fail and it's gonna be really bad. So those are things that I've set for myself. I try and set realistic pacing by something that my friend said to me. I think she might have been on this chat, but Anissa, one of my colleagues and friends and longtime fam, it said to me when we were quite young, was like always under promise and over deliver. And that's something that even though I use it, even though it's like a general rule, I use it actually to help me manage my condition as well, because I might be in one place when we started this project and be really raring to go in certain ways, but I have to account for the fact that there could be 5 illness days in the space of these 12-day period that we work together. So I have to be realistic about how much can I get done if I still had those days where I was really unwell and in bed and these kind of things. So, and then if I plan it according to that, then I know that if I do have those whole days where I'm 12 days and I'm well, then I'm kind of like, yeah, I can do it all. Do you know what I mean? I can probably do that, as opposed to saying I'm going to expect that I'm going to be 100% well the whole time, and
Right.
then I fall unwell, and then that feeds into that cycle of negative self-talk of like, I should be able to do this and I should be able to do that. The perception of yourself and who you are when you're unwell and living with a chronic condition is bringing those two things closer together is a real long journey, which
Yeah.
impacts you advocate for yourself in the workplace. Because I think for example, I was raised in quite a education focused household where, you know, education was first. I went to like a certain type of school and wanted to go to a certain type of uni and all these things. So the story that was told to me about who I was going to be was very different to the person that I have to be now, because I was raised on overachieving, which is actually dangerous for me to be now. Do you know what I mean? If I do that, then I'm going to end up in hospital all the time. So I have to match those two people and constantly rethink about who I am in that way. So that really, so that helps me advocate for myself in the workplace when I'm working with different clients or different organizations, to say, this is realistic. These are realistically the days that I'm going to come into the office. These are the things that I'm going to do remotely. These are the things that these are the amount of time that I need for that. I need regular breaks in this meeting, and try and just say it without apology.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because it's just like, this is actually also is just who I am. I can't really apologize for that. It's like, you either take me as me with this condition, or you don't have me. And I have a lot to offer, as well as being chronically unwell. So that's the way that I approach it, really.
And I definitely took something from that, you know, that can be applied. And I think that's a point of empowerment that you offered, that people with chronic conditions offer to people as a whole, that we live in a society where we're always trying to push ourselves to the max, and always trying to make sure that nobody considers us lazy or less than adequate, or all of these things. And it could be to the detriment of our physical or mental health in various ways. So I think that's a message to people in general, but definitely to people who are experiencing those kind of conditions. I want to talk about how your life experience has inspired you to create some of the organizations and projects that you worked on, such as Horizontal, such as Unmuted. And then can you tell us a little bit about the Sick Babes podcast that is coming soon, and when that's coming?
Oh yeah, cool.
That was a long question, I know.
No, it's cool. You phrased it well. So I think my experience as a queer person of color living in Birmingham was that I felt often quite isolated, and I also, because actually this does impact, because I was in my teens, I was, before I had my operation, my vision was significantly impaired, and I would have like experiences where I would experience things that are like similar to like passing out or fits or things like that. So I didn't go clubbing. It was interesting. I was talking to my partner the other day, and it was only then I really realized, I was like, oh yeah, I didn't actually do the whole going clubbing when I was 16, because you know, when you're younger, you don't really have friends that you can trust in the same way that you do when you're a bit older. Do you know what I mean? So I was always worried about, if I go out with this group of friends and I pass out in the club, are they just going to leave me there? So, or if I become unwell in the night, have I really got that person who's going to be willing to just say, you know what, it's fine, let's go home. Like, you know, as an adult now, you would do that. But I think when you're younger, you're a bit wary of trusting. So I didn't really have that exploration, I guess, as a young person, kind of go into gay clubs or go into queer spaces where people might traditionally explore their identity. So that really meant that I was disconnected in lots of ways, and I thought about how other people might be too. So I wanted to create a space that was non-alcohol focused, non-nighttime focused, daytime. So it really meant that people could access that space for various different reasons. If it's religious reasons, if they're in recovery from, you know, addiction, or whether it's just that they just kind of enjoy daytime and those kind of things a little bit more. So that's grown into a network now, and does very different projects in different ways. Horizontal was about me exploring as an artist what it meant for us to create accessible spaces within the arts world, which again is glorifies and idolizes burnout as like a prize that you have to have as part of like the project that you're doing. You know, like in the theater, you stay in the studio till all hours of the day and night and blah blah blah, and you get addicted to that buzz as well. I can't say that I haven't been there. I haven't been that person that's like, yeah, I just love this. Like, we're really going for it. But I had an experience when I was younger when where I was in the National Youth Theatre, and I pushed myself really hard when we had this like 2-week kind of residential in London, and I ended up in hospital on the last day. So because I went over the top, because it was the National Youth Theatre kind of tries to mimic your professional experiences. So it's like you get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, you do all this thing every day, you work really hard, and then at the end, you know, you do this amazing performance. But I really didn't want to miss out. I didn't want to be the quote unquote weirdo that was like not doing things. So I pushed myself really hard, and then literally ended up passing out straight after we finished the performance, and I passed out, and I had to end up going in an ambulance away from that. And that was really, I really internalized that would be the end of my experience in theatre and be my end of my experience in the arts. And it wasn't until like nearly 10 years later that I really came back and was like, right, okay, I want to explore what does it look like for me, a person like me, to be in this sector. So it grew out of that. And I think as part of that, we had a group of women and non-binary people who had invisible conditions, who met and spoke about how they experience everything from like relationships, from navigating the health sector, to family relationships, to sex, to body image, lots of different things that we chatted about. And that grew for me wanting to create the Sick Babe podcast, which is more of those conversations happening. So that's going to come in autumn, but I'm currently recording and exploring doing a mini-sode, which will just come in between that time. So it'll be exploring different topics in a light-hearted way, with different people who have similar experiences to me. So yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to that coming.
All right, good. So I want to shift a little bit and talk about how, of course, the coronavirus pandemic has affected, in general, people's access to healthcare. Of course, the focus has been so much on testing and treatment for coronavirus and things like that, that sometimes other conditions kind of fall to the wayside. And it's like, we don't know how long this is going to last. This, you know, we thought it was a month, and now it's been, what, 5 months, 4 months, and still going on. And it's like, while of course this is a major, has majorly impacted the world, of course people still need that access. People still need to make appointments to see their providers, their GPs, all of those things. So how do you kind of put all of that in that context?
Yeah, it's difficult actually, and I think it isn't until recently that I thought about, I think I was talking to my mom this morning actually about someone in our family who was living with cancer and dealing with and someone else who was dealing with other conditions as well. And it really showed those things, they don't go on pause. It's not like every condition's like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna step out the way now. Like they're all still there, and very much people, like you said, need to access that kind of support. And it is anxiety provoking for people living with those conditions, because even visiting a doctor's surgery or visiting a hospital has lots of different worries and implications now about it, you know, infection, exposure, this kind of, and even not just that. I think also just I guess if you live with a chronic health condition, you're used to something being wrong a lot of the time. So you kind of always have to bargain about which thing is the thing that I call my GP about, which is the thing that I go to A&E about. And I think maybe for people with chronic conditions, it's probably made people even more kind of hypervigilant in a way that might negatively affect them. So in the sense of, oh, I won't go for that because I just can't be bothered to wait in the A&E for that long or whatever. And I think probably even more so now, there might be a risk to people not accessing support that they need because they're worried about going into the hospital or going to the GP surgery.
Yeah.
I think it's also, I do wonder, have people in the hospital been redeployed? I don't know whether doctors
Mhm.
have now, who might be in special, like for example, my doctor who's a neurosurgeon, he specializes in my um my condition. Again, it's not a life or death situation. So I don't know, is he now being used in other ways in the hospital because everything's had to be rearranged?
Mhm.
So so I did think about it the other day. I thought, oh gosh, what if something happened in relation to my condition? How would I what would I do? Like would I actually raise it? How it's hard. I think sometimes maybe people sometimes wait until the nth degree. I can't say that I don't do that. I can't say that I've fully made peace with that. I think I think someone's just said A&E attendance is significantly decreased, and
Mhm.
I think that's real. And I think people with chronic conditions, um, a lot of people maybe feel invisible in even more so,
Mhm.
because I think, there's a sense of, also that sense of, I was isolated before, I was dealing with this a lot before. Suddenly now people are making things accessible that were before were just like you couldn't do. It was so hard to do, and now all of a sudden things are in the blink of an eye accessible. So that's it. That's the process of emotional, actually grieving that as well, grieving the reality of, you thought that it was happening, but when you see it happening for real, and going, oh, you really weren't meeting my needs. So that can be hard actually to process in a new way. So I think,
Yeah.
I feel for my people with chronic conditions, and fellow spoonies, as people say in the disability community. And I feel like I've gravitated more towards that community in this time, because I feel like I just need to hear people who get it, man. I just need to know people who understand, who have lived with things for years, who understand how frustrating the health service is, understand how underfunded the health service is. These are things that people with chronic illnesses and disabilities have been campaigning for years, because they've been under, it's not like the NHS was perfect and the COVID-19 has ripped it apart. It's been suffering for years. Like
Yeah.
it's in like, it's scary how, like, you're waiting for months and months and months for an appointment, and the people are getting unwell in that time, mentally, physically, and
Yeah.
also the social implications of your family dynamics, all those things that people don't think about when they think about illness. They just think about you being ill in your body and getting well. They don't think about the implications it has actually on your partner, on your family, on all.
Mhm.
It's hard to hold that all, it for them as well. Do you know what I mean? For carers, for people who are around
Yes.
you.
Yeah. Those indirect
So
costs that people
exactly, yeah.
talk about. Yeah. Well, I just want to take a moment. We have been having a great conversation, and I've so appreciated your willingness to share with us and enlighten us. I just want to give a shout out to all those. I'm not going to call names right now, but I've appreciated all of those who've been giving their feedback on the chat as well. And if anybody wants to follow this later, you can let people know or share this. It's going to be on the IGTV, on the stories, and as well as the IGTV on Black Beetle Health later on. But finally, I want to give Suriya the opportunity to kind of give, a final empowering word to our Black Beetle Health community as a whole, especially those in underrepresented communities. Just, you're a successful person who has been able to, yes, deal with this, but put that in the context of everything that you're about. And I just want you to give a final word to our viewers on that.
um I want to this sounds strange, but I want to say something about that. Your experiences, for your experience of your body is valid and real, and the pain or experiences that you're having of it are true, whether or not you've been able to get a diagnosis, whether or not you've been able to get that validation from the medical professionals. It's your experience is something that you can own for yourself. Find the words that feel best to describe yourself,
Mhm.
find the community that can feel who you feel understand you, and don't feel that you're too much, because it can feel that you're too much anyway. As a person of color, we always get that challenge. We always feel like, oh, you're being over the top. You're not. Like, your experiences are not too much. You should be able to access the support that you need. Your needs are valid, and it takes time as well to find peace with articulating those experiences that you're having. So don't also beat yourself up if you're not like there in an immediate of suddenly wake up and I'm ready to advocate for myself on all areas, because it ebbs and flows, and we should be sitting together to support each other in doing that.
Yes. And somebody just made a comment, I think it was Carrie, that talked about how our health system a lot of times can be so reactive about treating a crisis
Mm.
rather than preventive. And that's a topic for, we could have a whole conversation about
Yeah.
that. But definitely just being able to advocate for ourselves, being mindful that everybody's not going to own your issue the way that you do, and finding
Mm.
that network. I mean, as you mentioned, the Facebook groups, there are support groups, whether it's on Facebook or other platforms, for pretty much every condition that you can think of. So find those support groups in your local community or online, making sure that that you're, keeping on top of your provider. Because,
Mm.
in previous years or decades, with that patriarchal kind of approach to medicine, the doctor told you, and that was the end of the story. But now we're much more able to have an integrated approach with our
Mm.
healthcare and say, I have a question. What about this treatment I've heard about? What about this? And kind of bring that to the table more. So I just want to thank you, Suriya, so much. This has been a really good conversation. And please let people know where they can follow you. Gotta
Yeah,
mention
thank
that.
you so much for having me. I'll just type my out. I think that's where you can find me.
Mhm.
I try and post a lot of what I'm doing on there, and then you can also unmute it as well. You can follow the stuff that we do there. So yeah, it was really great to chat to you today. This is really, really great conversation, and yeah, hope to connect with you in the future as well.
Thank you. And to all of our audience, definitely if you would like to find out more about what Black Beauty Health is doing, and we have another presentation coming up in a few days, definitely follow us on Instagram, Black Beauty Health, our website, blackbeautyhealth.co.uk, and then please take the survey. It's posted in our bio to let us know how you enjoyed this talk, and to keep abreast of things that are coming in the future. So thank you, Suriya, and you have a great rest of your day.
See you soon. Bye.
Okay.